So let's move to woke, eh?
Yeah. So, Mark, I've got this frame that I've been kind of playing with lately. I want to try it on you, try it out on you, try it out on our audience. Because my experience, um, sort of trying to get a handle on wokeism, is that there's a whole lot of wokeism that really doesn't appeal to me, and there's a whole lot to wokeism that I actually think is important and needs to be properly integrated, located, sort of freed by limiting it in a certain kind of way. There's some important concepts in here that I want to save from the bathwater, right? Of sort of the more extreme, oftentimes amber forms of wokeism that are out there.
So even before you go,
Yeah.
why don't I give a little history on it and then do your take?
Rock, man.
Okay. Because I think that for those that maybe are even unfamiliar with the term and its historical usage, then it can set you up to riff and then we can go back and forth on it.
There you go.
That sound good?
Yep.
So, you know, woke is this kind of come to mean this kind of like this leftist political ideology centered around the issue of social justice and and things like critical race theory and other kind of left-leaning philosophies are including intersectionality, actually, which we'll talk about later
Mhm.
a little bit, are kind of like grounded as part of this idea of wokeism. And so, but like when you look at the word woke in its history, it's a word that comes from like the African American community.
Mhm.
Okay, and it's been appropriated.
It's been culturally appropriated.
It has, but like the earliest forms were like the Jamaican activist Marcus Garvey talking about woke as as being awake, and the blues musician Ledbetter, who I had some albums of way back in the day. I mean, we're talking old. This is like Robert Johnson old blues.
Lead belly.
Or excuse me, Ledbetter. As
Yeah.
his name was actually Ledbetter.
Oh, really?
He is, yes.
Interesting.
He went by Lead Belly.
I still remember Kurt Cobain covering Lead Belly in that final unplugged
Yeah,
concert they did in like 94, right before he committed suicide, 93, right before he
yeah, right. And so so and so Lead Belly wrote like about this blues song. I think about the Scottsboro Boys in Arkansas. There were 9 of them that were getting messed with by the police bad, and and talked about stay woke. Like we got to stay aware. We have to stay awake as a form of like what's happening around us, right? And because our safety and this is dangerous for our Black community.
Mhm.
And then in the 60s, and I think 1962, there was a writer named William Melvin Kelly, um, wrote a book, a novel, where he kind of talked about that being woke as a Black person was kind of being aware about how white folks kind of appropriate and kind of try to take over our language, our dance moves, our music.
Cultural idioms. Yeah, totally.
We've
Mhm.
got to stay woke. We've got to stay aware of that. And so that was, another, you know, use of it. And then, other African Americans use stay woke about being, privy and aware that you might have a cheating partner,
Mhm.
and that you gotta stay woke and you gotta stay aware
That was
about.
like the Urban Dictionary definition, I believe.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
It might be actually, is it? I
I
haven't looked at that, but
yeah.
and then we get Ferguson, and we're talking, Ferguson, Missouri, and and the Michael who was murdered um, there by the police, and then woke really started to like really kind of come into the culture and kind of become glue, and so it became this cry against systemic racism.
Yep.
So it kind of enveloped that there is systemic racism and a cry against it,
Right.
all at once. And so, you know, that that's kind of some history on it. And so, like some of the criticisms, right? And this is maybe where I think you're going to give a rich picture here.
We'll see.
Um, is that it's like this? Some people talk about it just being superficially performative,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Separating the hyper socially aware, becoming the self-appointed gatekeepers of language and behavior, right? Um, kind of almost like this phony show of progressive activism, where some African American activists have like watched these folks take selfies and like use signs and act in these ways that um, don't really show folks being on the front lines. I remember when I was in college, law school, I was told a story about one of our classmates who got a sea kayak and then um, just wanted to take pictures of him in the kayak and not really go in the water with it. And then was like, had rented it for like 25 bucks and was like, I'm good,
Yeah.
and then left. And
It's like Instagram activism.
yeah. And so, there's that kind of stuff.
We
And
call it peacocking. I mean, this is oftentimes how young men try to attract mates.
right.
They
It's so
virtue signal, which is their version of putting up their big old peacock tail, right? Notice me, ladies.
true. Oh God, I saw a beautiful peacock. I remember many years ago in the Rome Zoo. It was
Mhm.
just, and it was acting out, and it was, you know,
Effective. It
yeah.
probably turned you on a little bit. You're like, ooh, peacock.
Look at that. Maybe it turned my wife on. I don't know about me, but oh, it turned me on. Okay, I
It
admit it.
made you gay for
Turned
peacock.
on.
Come
I was
on.
turned on. But this hyper kind of hyper political correctness is like is an unhealthy result of this, right? So you get like Lori Sheck, who's a professor at New School in New York, and she's having a class discussion about James Baldwin and the documentary that was called, I'm Not Your Negro. And in reality, and so it was based on a debate he had with a very famous William Buckley, right? William F. Buckley, the founder of the National Review, and conservative icon. I think was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Reagan, um, and he debated Baldwin, and it was you can watch it. It's pretty awesome to watch. But during the debate, he didn't say "I'm not your Negro." He said "I'm not your," the N word, and so she brought that up in class and spoke directly about what was said and said, why did the producers and the folks, you know, dilly dally this and kind of bring it down? And then a white student said, because she used the N word, said, oh, told the appropriate authorities. She was suspended, and then no real due process, and eventually she was allowed back in the classroom. And it's like, okay, that's extreme. That doesn't allow the dialectic, that doesn't allow the Socratic process.
Right.
And so there's that. And I mean, another really a stupid one that's kind of, I just read the other day, and I'm sorry I don't have any more of these cookies to share, because we just celebrated Purim, and so there was apparently and so there's these cookies called Hamantashen cookies, and we had some, and I don't have any more because we ate them all. Um, and so, but Bon Appetit 5 years ago, 6 years ago, put out they put out an article saying, hey, you know, you probably never had a really good hamantaschen cookie. Now we've got the recipe. And so, a woman named Abigail Koffler recently was going through and found this recipe and found this article out in Bon Appetit, and she wasn't having it because the maker of the cookie and the that were supposedly these really good cookies was not Jewish and had no, and she was married to someone that was in trouble at Condé Nast um, for racism, and so therefore they had no right to share with us a good recipe on that. And Bon Appetit wilted and wrote a disclaimer on the article and explained why this is not right. Only Jewish people can ever talk about this, etc. And mind you, my wife is not Jewish and makes some of the best badass cookies. So this is some of the ridiculous nature of it. I'm going to let you riff now, um, because I'm going to go like why it still really matters. Like there's this stuff really matters, and I want to get into that. But I hope that sets you up to.
No, that's perfect. That was a great sort of history lesson of how we got here and how some of these views have both matured in some cases and metastasized in others. And we spent a while back talking about framing the unhealthy aspects of wokeism tend actually not to come out of green. They tend to come out of amber. It actually, oftentimes wokeism is expressing itself as a new kind of conservatism, a new kind of largely unhealthy amber conservatism.
Yes.
I don't want to, there, just to be clear to anyone watching us right now, we talk about healthy conservatism all the time. This would be an example of unhealthy conservatism. Whenever you want to banish something, push it away, you want to burn the witches and burn the books and burn the Beatles albums, that is an amber conservative response, right, to cultural influences that you don't like for whatever reason, because they violate your morality for whatever reason, right? And so you get a little bit militaristic about it. This is a lot of what we see happening with wokeism, and it's something to be rightfully criticized. However, this is what I've noticed, Mark. I've noticed that like 99% of the time when I see a criticism of woke, it's coming from a pre-woke point of view.
Yes.
It's coming from either an amber or an orange point of view. And to me, I've just seen that this has not been a generative conversation at all. Even in our own audience, we have a lot of people who are very, very supportive of some of the good faith contributions that have come out of the woke movement. And we've got a lot, everyone else in our audience who's very cautious about what, this sort of branch of the left is up to these days, right? So you go to a place like Integral Global, and you might see, a debate kind of going back and forth. In fact, I, had an interesting experiment last night where I posted a suggestion. I posted an invitation to start having what I'm just calling from here on out post woke conversations. And I think that frame helps. I certainly didn't coin that phrase, right? But I'm going to claim it because I think that this is the space where we should be trying to have those conversations and role modeling this kind of enactment. How can we criticize wokeism in a way that, again, rescues the really, really important babies from the bathwater? What does that level, what does that kind of integration actually look like? And to me, just sort of feeling into this, one of the first things that comes up for me is, I talked earlier about how we live in this era that really reifies the persona and the identity, and how these are really some of the more surface, shallow aspects of self. I mean, the self goes deep, it goes far. There's a lot of layers that contribute to this thing called self. And we largely are leading with our identities. We're fetishizing our own identities. That's a big problem. And I think that gets sort of cemented into place through the versions of intersectionality that we have today. So typical woke intersectionality is basically, here's what it's doing. Basically what it's doing is it's looking at a single axis, right? It's an axis of privilege versus oppression, is how it's commonly put out there. And then we sort of use that axis in order to make sense of all of these different identity types that are out there, which is something we talked about last month. We don't have a story of development in our culture, so all we do is type each other, right? And this is where intersectionality is sort of left today. These types are more privileged or more oppressed. So the types can be cisgendered, it can be, it can be male or female, it can be black or white. I mean, any number of these sort of types that we use to define our identity. I'm this type, not that type, right? This is sort of the state of intersectionality as we find it today. I think this actually could be sort of a transition to a bigger, better, fuller, more comprehensive intersectionality. In fact, one of the claims I made is that integral is intersectionality. It just does it better, right?
Yeah.
We don't just stick
Yeah.
with a single axis and apply it only to types. We actually have an intersectionality of perspective, which is different than an intersectionality of identity. And we begin to see that identity is a really, really important part of perspective. And it's not one that we want to push away or, sort of minimize or anything like that. It is absolutely an important part of your perspective, but it's not like the main juice here.